Welcome to the Career Advice Series webinar, Millennials, Dispelling Myths, Leveraging Their Strengths and Capturing Business Opportunities. The ABA Career Advice Series is a monthly webinar series that contains practical tips on job search and professional development issues for seasoned and new lawyers alike. The Career Advice Series is produced by the ABA Legal Career Central. Legal Career Central offers both career development resources and serves as the home of the ABA job board, where you can upload your resume to make it visible for employers searching and to get a head start on finding your next job. All of this and more is accessible at ambar.org/careers. Today our presenters are Scott Westfahl and Avery Blank. Scott Westfahl is a professor of practice and the faculty director of executive education at Harvard Law School. He focuses his teaching, writing, and research on leadership teams, networks, and the application of innovation and design thinking principles to solving legal problems. Avery Blank is a lawyer and impact strategy consultant. She is a contributor with Forbes, a board member with the ABA Legal Career Central, and an advisory council member with the Wilson Center's Women in Public Service Project. With that being said, I will turn it over to our speakers.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with everyone here. This is Scott Westfahl. As executive education faculty director at Harvard Law School, I have the privilege of being able to run leadership programs for law firm leaders from all over the world. And I noticed as we were started to teach them about topics relating to leadership that they were increasingly concerned about how to address issues relating to the new generation of lawyers within as millennial lawyers were coming into their organizations, and did some thinking about this and had the great privilege to meet Avery Blank and connect with her. And we started this project about trying to help provide useful resources and perspectives on this important topic. What we found and what I noticed was that, especially with respect to older law firm leaders, there were a lot of people in the market really trying to scare them about how different millennials were from any other generation that's ever existed in human history, and that they're from Mars, and they made it so complicated and difficult, and in a way antagonistic, that we wanted to write something to help figure out how can we create synergy, dispel some myths, and figuring out how can we leverage the incredible strengths that millennials and the next generation of lawyers are bringing into legal organizations. Avery can talk about our goals, specific goals for today, but that's the overall background. We really want to be serving as a bridge here and to move this dialogue away from categorizing people in stark, unhelpful terms.
Yeah. Thanks, Scott. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. And I think what's so unique is the fact that we do, in fact, bring different generational perspectives to the table. I think very often we talk about different generations, but it's not so often that the actual generations, actually speak to each other on a project. So the collaboration has been unique and exciting. So on today's webinar, we're going to touch on 3 goals. And the first is we're talking about millennials because we don't want to widen the gap, we want to bridge the gap. It is so easy for us to look at the differences, around, in this day and age, we're always focused on the differences, but we really want to figure out the underlying commonalities and the similarities.
Yeah, and I think on top of that, we want to get rid of the judgment that gets applied in terms of people, resentful behaviors, younger people resenting older people and vice versa, and help give some context that makes it possible to bridge that. what we're also, very importantly focused on is what are the practical takeaways. Whenever we teach our leadership programs for law firm leaders, we want to make sure that they come away with very practical takeaways. What can we do differently? And on both sides, and one of the things that I've most enjoyed about this work is working with you, Avery, because, we come from different generations, have different perspectives, and you challenge me all the time when we do this. So this will be a lot of fun to do as well. So, let's get started with, looking at why this is so important. Change is accelerating all around the world. The legal profession is under a lot of stress with globalization and technology and regulatory changes around the world. This is a really important thing to do, because I think for legal organizations like law firms, for example, to survive all of the potential disruption coming our way, they're going to need the energy, insight, and new types of skills that younger lawyers, millennials, are bringing to them. So we've got to do that. So let's get started. When we started this framework, we decided we would take a look at myths and what we hear in the market about millennials, and then try to dispel those myths. And we had a lot of fun doing this project together, because I had different perspectives on it, and you'll see that Avery has different perspectives, and we found common ground. As a starting point, we fundamentally believe that the motivational factors that motivate all human beings actually stay constant over generations. It's the social context in which we act upon motivations that changes. So we read Shakespeare 500 years later and we think, boy, he really understood how people think. And this sounds just like what's happening in our politics today, for example. We do that because, again, fundamental human nature and needs are similar. It's just the social context changes. So myth number one, that millennials are needy and they want to be coddled and encouraged with positive feedback in a way that prior generations have not been. We hear this charge sometimes from, older people. Why do they always want so much feedback? I never asked for that kind of feedback. I wasn't as demanding of it. When I hear that, I start to, think, wait a minute, we have to appreciate that this generation, the digital generation, that has come into the workplace is so in tune with feedback circles through social media in a way that in all of human history, we haven't been able to achieve prior to this. So think about the idea of, for example, food. I ask law firm leaders, senior people, if you're going to a new restaurant, do you go online and read reviews? And they all say, absolutely, I read reviews. And then I say, how many of you have written a review? And almost none of them have. Like, well, who's writing these reviews? Well, it's the millennials and the younger people who have realized when they aggregate their voices on social media, the world changes. And the food revolution that we're seeing all around the world is happening because people have raised their voices and leveraged the collective voice through feedback loops. And, it's incredible to me that the world can change so quickly. Avery, you understand this. You have educated me a lot about this.
Yeah. In terms of social media, I mean, it's true. Social media allows us to contribute, instantly and directly, and really have our voices heard. There's another example that I like to give with regards to Twitter. So another social media example where I remember being at home and my father was on the phone with a telephone company, and it was on for a really long time. And I asked him, I said, what are you, staying on the line for? What is taking so long? And he told me, and I got on my phone. I tweeted directly to the company, and within a minute or so, I got a response. And so, we're used to having direct access, immediate access, and being able to give feedback and quickly receiving it as well. And I think what's interesting, or at least the younger generations are finding, is that, legal organizations don't allow for the kind of impact that millennials are used to. We don't have always necessarily the ability to go directly to the point person or receive the feedback as quickly as we would like. And so Scott, what are your insights in terms of what law firms can do to, help millennials, seek that feedback loop that we're yearning for?
Absolutely. And, understanding the barriers in front of us. We have a very traditional profession where with a tradition of a long apprenticeship period before someone's voice is considered to be relevant. And that's getting in our way. At law schools too, we share some of the blame. Our legal education model, for the most part in the U.S. anyways, gives no feedback for developmental purposes. We have one exam per class in the first year. It's only for the benefit of ranking people who want to hire them as new associates or law clerks, and it's not helpful feedback. And we don't have a tradition of developmental feedback and organizational learning through feedback, even in the working of teams. So we have all of these barriers in front of us, and we have millennials coming into law firms expecting that their voice can be heard because that's what they've been used to their entire lives. When they hit the wall of the organization, not really caring about their voice or asking them any questions. They're implementing new policies or things that affect associate lives without involving them in the discussion. It gets incredibly frustrating. So trends that I'm seeing that are very positive, firms are improving developmental feedback, and there's some new experiments building upon what's been happening in the corporate world. Corporate world's always way in front. Firms are now looking at how can we give more technology-enabled feedback, for example, that's developmental as the work is happening. There's a movement away in the corporate world from annual reviews, and I think that trend is picking up with respect to law firms. Some are doing some, very innovative work. The law firm Hogan Lovells hired IDEO, the design thinking company, to come in and redesign associate feedback, project-based feedback especially. That's going to help. I think another thing that gets missed, and I teach a lot about this and talk a lot about this, is the fact that lawyers don't actually work in teams. We say we do, but that's not what happens. An expert looking at the way most lawyers work together would say that it's a loose working group, not a team that gets together and looks at the team process. When I spent 6 years at McKinsey in the consulting world, and what they do very well there is measure constantly how well are we serving the client, and also how well are we working together as a team. And in the team process, they're giving and receiving feedback about how they're working together constantly. And it's the most junior person who is, very critical to understanding how can we gain more efficiency where the bulk of the work is being done. They have at McKinsey a value that they call the obligation to dissent. If you're a junior member on the team and you're not speaking up and adding value to the team, they're going to criticize you for not adding the value that you can add.
I love that.
We have exactly the opposite, where we are. And I think that it's a real risk for us as a profession if we can't get out in front of creating team processes, because clients will also benefit tremendously from the efficiency gains if we start to do that more effectively.
Yeah, I mean, as millennials, we want to be part of a team. And I think that, think of me as the representative millennial for the purpose of this webinar. And just remember that I want to be in that room with you. For whatever project, whatever client it is, I want to be in that room because I want to contribute. I want to be able to add value to the team and to the project. So what can law firms do? Always be thinking in the back of their mind that millennial wants to be in that room. Now, the second myth is that millennials are too inexperienced to know that their opinions are not yet valuable, and their push to rate and review everything is arrogant and unhelpful. What do you think about that, Scott, when people say that?
Yeah, no, it builds upon what we were just saying, in that the idea of the long apprenticeship, is based on the idea that it's not appropriate for a second or third year associate at a law firm to give very sophisticated technical legal advice to a client. And until they're able to do that, I don't want to hear from them. And you hear, for those of you at law firms now and those of you in professional development who are listening, when you hear partners calling younger associates, kids and bodies and language like that, they hear that, by the way. And, the idea that their opinions are not valuable, are just wrong. As I was just saying, at McKinsey, they're recognizing that the youngest people are often right at the intersection of where the most efficiency in client service can be gained. And so, drawing them in and being helpful, is really critical. I think, for example, right now, law firms are starting to explore how will blockchain and artificial intelligence affect, our business, and how can we leverage those, new technologies. But a lot of firms have technology committees where there's no one under 45 years old on the technology committee. It ought to be the younger lawyers who are leading that whole charge. I was literally just on the phone with a Harvard Law School graduate from last year who has left a very large law firm in the last month because he was finding it too constraining that way. And he has an expertise. He had 4 years prior to law school in technology. He knows all about blockchain, and he wasn't being included in the firm's processes that way. And they're just way behind the game, and he knows it. So he's going to go probably work with a consulting firm, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about this generational differences, but it's all about generational diversity, right? And so, there's this new push, and as there should be, to increase diversity. And diversity doesn't just mean about gender, race, or there's varied types of diversity, and that is diversity of thought. What I'm thinking may be very different from what Scott is thinking, may be very different from what people on the phone are thinking. And so we really value diversity. In fact, studies have shown that one of the most important aspects in a job search and considering jobs is diversity, and that means diversity of thought. And again, we want to speak up, and it's not so much that we want to speak up to hear our own voices. It's so that we can really add value. We want to make an impact. And one of the things that law firms can do is they can engage in reverse mentoring. So much of the mentoring that happens, traditional mentoring, is, when the more experienced generation gives insight, and understanding and learnings to the younger generation. Well, now, there's a lot to be learned from the younger generations, whether it's technology or social media or some of the new trends, and really, creating a disciplined program where you can gather those thoughts and really capture those ideas can really lead to some really interesting business opportunities. Now, the thing, though, with reverse mentoring is that while we, the younger generation, want to be able to add value to the more experienced generation, not all of us are comfortable, in necessarily telling people what to do, or at least going up to someone that's older than us and more experienced, and having that reverse mentoring conversation. So what's really helpful is for an organization to create some type of structure or framework that allows for, some disciplined time or structure that allows for the younger generation to impart knowledge to the more experienced employees of the organization.
To me, that's such an easy win when we're talking. We promised at the beginning that we would talk about practical solutions. To me, that's such an easy win. A legal organization that says we care about our newest, members, our younger people, and we would like them to be able to share their opinions and help educate, our more senior people about trends and ideas and technologies that they see coming, or the way that they work and the way that they think. There was a Bloomberg study 2 years ago, I think, that was showing that the generation of leaders who are leading, Fortune 100 companies now is a generation younger than the generation who are leading large law firms. And that gap is widening. It will move into the millennial space before too long. And, if I were, a law firm leader, I would want reverse mentoring as soon as possible, especially for the mid-level partners who will be the next generation of leaders. Get them ready for that and start building some of these relationships and new perspectives. There's so much value that can be added with respect to, collaborative technologies, as one example. What I see from our students coming into the law school is they're used to using so many different collaborative technologies, and they understand those much better than partners would. If I think there are a lot of efficiencies that could be gained by doing that. One of the things too that I think can be really helpful is looking at team process overall and psychological safety. Avery, you're mentioning that this idea that generational diversity and diversity of thought are so critical. All of the studies that we look at when we study leadership in teams shows that diverse teams will outperform homogeneous teams of experts, provided though that the team gets along and that all voices are heard. And that's a really big provided. Everyone is worried that the legal profession pushing towards diversity won't be able to leverage it. Diversity doesn't matter if voices aren't actually heard. So looking at team processes with, the way consulting, engineering, military, all of the other professions use teams and feedback within tools, engagement surveys, constructive dialogue around how well we're working together as a team, what can we do better, and the idea that there's psychological safety within a team is really critical. One of my former McKinsey colleagues is head of people analytics and compensation at Google. A major study that he did was featured in the New York Times a couple of years ago, what Google learned about teams. And if you Google it, you'll see that psychological safety in teams and did people feel like everybody's voice mattered was the most important factor looking at whether a Google team was successful. It was a lot less about the quality and the character of the leader than whether in the room everybody felt like they could talk. The next myth moving forward, right? I think is about loyalty, and this one, we hear from law firm leaders a lot. Millennials are less loyal to organizations than previous generations were, and I look back on my own career as an example, as an older person at Avery, and I have been able to have traded a lot of perspectives and. I hope I don't sound too old when I talk to you about these things, Avery. But here's what it looked like. I joined a law firm in Washington D.C. in late '80s, early '90s. I'm down there working as an associate, and there was only one place where we could find job postings for in-house legal positions or government legal positions if we wanted to leave the large law firm world. It was a newspaper called Legal Times, and we waited till the partners went home. It came out once a week, and we'd go to the back pages of Legal Times, and we'd look for the ads. And then eventually there was a guy who came up with something he called the Attorney Jobs newsletter, and we paid him $30 a month, and he delivered a mimeographed 4-page double-sided list of jobs that he had aggregated, found somehow. It came in a brown paper envelope with no return address. And, that was the way we were looking for jobs. And when I talk to older lawyers about this, they remember that we had no market information about what other jobs were out there unless a headhunter offered us a job at another law firm doing basically the same thing. We weren't loyal, I argue. We were stuck. And, and I think that the legal market, the market for talent worldwide in all of human history has never been as transparent as it is now, and it's only going to get more transparent. Organizations have become a lot less loyal to their people across, all dimensions, including law firms. Um, and we know that, but from a talent perspective, it's so much easier to find and be found now. And so it just raises the bar. And I try to tell older lawyers, look, you can't sit around resenting that fact and calling people disloyal. They have market power. When clients gained market power, post financial crisis, and they're kind of in the driver's seat now with respect to, their demands of large law firms. Law firm leaders didn't go around wasting time resenting the clients for it very much. They just figured out how to serve the clients better and how to compete more effectively. The same thing is true in the talent market. That's what firms have to do now.
Yeah. I think what's interesting is, with the touch of a button, the internet, we can get the information that we need. And that is true now for all generations, not just millennials, but maybe perhaps because millennials grew up, in such a way that allowed us, access to it at much earlier stages in life. There are times when the younger generations are more facile, with the technology and really empowered, to use that technology. So, going back to this idea of loyalty, I think millennials would say, yeah, we are loyal, intensely loyal, but only if we're given the right thing. So it's almost like this term or this concept of conditional loyalty. And I'll identify 4 drivers of loyalty and get a little bit into each of them. One is that millennials are looking for environments that allow us to be ourselves. 2, we're looking for flexible workplaces. 3, we're looking for organizations and people that are going to teach us how to practically apply information. And 4, we're looking for the opportunity to take on greater responsibility and leadership roles. So to go back to number 1, environments, we're looking for environments that allow us to be ourselves. Scott, you nailed it when in terms of psychological safety. The part is, when a lot of people talk about this, this idea of bringing our whole selves to work. And there's a study done by Deloitte, and there's this term and the concept called covering. And that is people in professional contexts who don't feel like they can be their true selves at work, because they feel like they have to downplay a certain aspects of themselves to fit into this corporate culture. So they could be covering, due to something that's related to their gender, their race, their ethnicity, their age, their socioeconomic status, their political affiliation. There's something there that they're either hiding or they're downplaying because they don't feel comfortable being themselves. And when people don't feel comfortable being themselves, their productivity lowers. And so there's this real, need for organizations to allow people to be themselves. And that's what millennials are looking for. Number 2, we're looking for a flexible workplace. So when it comes to flexibility, the other term that's also used and bounced around a lot is work-life balance. The thing with work-life balance is that a lot of times, and especially when younger employees use the term, is there's this connotation or there's this thought that we want to work less. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for a flexible workplace. We're looking for work-life balance that allows us to work better. So what that means is, maybe we leave at 4:30, from the office, and we go play kickball or pick our children up, from soccer practice. But then we're back on, online on email, from 8 to 10 at night. And so we're looking for a flexible workplace, but we're not just looking for one that just says it. We're looking for people at the organization that are role models. So, we're looking for people who are going to practice what they preach. So are there going to be people of, more experienced generations who are also practicing, a flexible lifestyle? Because when we see them do it, it makes us feel more comfortable and allows us to do the same. Third, we're looking for an organization that teaches how to practically apply information. So in law school, we learn the law, but afterwards, we still need a lot of help. We're still looking at how to apply the information. So while many might think that we feel like we know everything. We don't. We know we don't. We're looking for leadership. We're looking for people to support us and educate us on what we know and how to apply that information. I mean, yes, we can go onto Google, we can search the information, but there's only so much that we can do with Google. We're looking for that next step. We're looking for that support. Fourth, we're looking for the opportunity to take on greater responsibility and leadership roles. Yes, we do realize that, we have to put in our time. We're not expecting to be at the top immediately. But we are looking for ways to make impact. And so again, going back to what Scott talked about, thinking that you're in a team, allowing us on that team to have, greater responsibility, giving us a stretch project, allowing us to represent the firm or the organization outside by speaking or by publishing something with our names on it, giving us opportunities for us to make an impact will really help us to feel like we're adding value to the company.
Whenever I hear you talk about those 4 pillars, Avery, I realize how much I've learned from our interactions, and I reflect on, those topics and how far afield our profession is right now in some ways. This idea of being yourself, to me, it's actually really tragic that in a lot of legal organizations, people really don't bring their whole selves to the workplace. I work a lot in training of law firm associates, for example, and in a recent program, just among peers, for example, we had, a number of people in our classroom, law firm associates, and at the beginning of a program, they were introducing themselves, and we asked them to share something about, their life, and 2/3 of them really said, there's nothing interesting about me. And I know that that's not true, but they're so not used to sharing that, even among a group of peers. It's really, really tough. It's not also being modeled from the top. So, for example, if you go on the intranet internally in any legal organization, I know almost any. There's maybe a couple of exceptions. You look up a person's contact information and bio. There might be a biographical description where they went to school, but the description is written by the marketing department about what the nature of their practice is. There's no information in there about who they are more broadly as a person. Organizations like Deloitte, for example, even 10, 15 years ago, Deloitte launched something called D Street, which is, an internal Facebook where there's professional information presented, but there's a lot of other information presented. I think as a practical matter, for example, if I were in charge at a firm, I would design an intranet that would allow for more robust professional information that wasn't written by the marketing department to be out there. For example, here's a partner's profile. I looked them up. It talks about, here are the top 5 clients to which they've billed time in the last year, or their top 5 clients. Here's what the partner would say. Here are the 5 things to remember when you're working with me. Here are the 3 associates who worked the most with this partner. So if you're a new person working with this person and you're stuck, you can go to them for help. Here are the civic organizations and other external involvement the partner's involved with in case you're interested in these topics. And here's some personal information if the person cares to share about, their interests, their passions, their family, whatever. But it's impossible at most firms to find any information about, that kind of level that allows and signals to people that they can be themselves. I've talked to law firm associates. I remember even 2 months ago, I talked to one that was, if they're at the firm, this person is a really, really talented musician, but no one at the firm knows it, and she would never tell them. To me, it's really sad, and I think it's one of those factors that is increasing the flight from the profession. Unfortunately, another thing I wanted to pick up on was this idea of work-life balance, because I think you're exactly right, Avery. Millennials, this myth that people don't want to, work as hard is absolutely ridiculous. My students at the law school work much harder than I worked, for example. They're just working in an environment where, since everything is available 24/7, they want to figure out a pattern of work that makes more sense. There's actually a really interesting new book that's come out from Dan Pink about the human biology and work cycles, and about how at different times of the day, physiologically, we're geared towards doing different types of activities, and none of the way we work, by the way, at a law firm is aligned with any of our physiology, but also for mental health. I think generationally too, it's really inappropriate for older lawyers to resent this idea that the conversation around work-life integration, or around that the millennials are raising. Because when I was practicing, there was a FedEx deadline at 7:45, and you got all your comments to the other side and documents and a deal in that box by 7:45, and you had a bit more work to do, but you could go home and there wasn't email, there weren't people texting you. And if clients are demanding, being available 24/7, that's fine, but we have to find another way to work, and design teams, for example. I appreciate that in the way we're working right now, it could be difficult if there's a court deadline, or if there's, particular deal deadlines, to say, well, I'm going to go, home and play soccer, or, do something else, climb a wall at a gym. And millennials are smart enough to understand that there are times when, those deadlines are approaching and things are not flexible. But on the other hand, what they do in other organizations is organize themselves in more interdependent teams so people have coverage. And there's been a lot of experimentation around this in the consulting world. For example, Boston Consulting Group, has done some great experimenting around, okay, on this team, each person's going to have one night off when they're just not on their BlackBerry or iPhone. I got to say iPhone. I'm an older person. I remember BlackBerries. iPhone, you're not on your iPhone. You're not checking email tonight. We're going to cover for you. We haven't really experimented with any of that. And Avery, you talked about role models too. And one of the things that I'm really worried about is that because of the lack of role models, and including role models of people who want to talk to clients about expectations and talk about what does the client actually need. I see a lot of law firm partners, especially younger to mid-level partners, who are so driven to generate their own books of business that they would never push back on a client and say, do you really need this, by Friday night or Saturday morning? Could this wait till Monday? And a lot of times the client response might be, actually, Monday is fine. But right. And it's kind of know that, but they're not being championed and no one's asking about it.
Yeah, just 2 points, Scott, that I want to make. I think one is that, when we talk about this, work-life balance, I think also it's a sense of predictability, right? That we don't want to necessarily feel like we have to be tethered all the time to our phones, but it's more about this, predictability of our schedules so that we have more autonomy over our schedules. And having control. And I think that that's what everyone wants. Perhaps maybe the younger generation has been a little bit more vocal about that. The other thing is when it comes to client expectations, again, Scott, you mentioned that now the clients, many times, the leaders or the executives at these companies are younger than we expect them to be. They're a generation younger. And so thinking about how the client's expectations may, in fact, be more similar to the younger generations of the law firm. So it behooves them, another reason, it behooves them to think about, the way in which they work may, in fact, be more reflective of, what the client, how the client works and what their expectations are.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, and this idea that, well, partners will say, well, this is a super competitive market. I'm like, are you really saying that you're going to outcompete on timing of delivery of something? Now, sometimes that's important when you've got key deadlines, but I think that, you're not going to differentiate yourself as a firm from the market just based on that kind of responsiveness. You can't be unresponsive. But I think there's a misperception that that's the most important thing, or one of the most important things. I think that we do a lot of leadership programs with general counsel, and while that's important, and of course, it's part of the game. They do expect responses. They're also people, and and the nature of the in-house practice is changing so much that they are younger, and there's also a gender, growing gender gap. So in-house lawyers are increasingly women, and one of the things that isn't talked about enough is that this demand for flexibility and the inflexibility of a lot of the structures around the way legal work gets done in law firms, has been driving women out of the profession for a long time, and that's really a problem. I've written some other articles about some of those barriers, and I really think that in some ways this issue is a canary in the coal mine. If law firms can't figure out how to create more flexibility in the way and redesign the way they work, um, millennials and women will increasingly leave, and the disruptive forces coming at law are not only artificial intelligence and technology, blockchain, technology solutions. The big four accounting firms and the consulting firms are going to grow exponentially in the legal space in the next 10 years. I promise you. And they're way out in front in terms of engineering teams and engineering for flexibility and creating environments where all voices are heard. So it will be very interesting to see what happens. I think with respect to predictability, you're really onto something, because most law firm associates I'll talk to, for example, aren't complaining, necessarily about the volume. It's just that, look, I really want to go to yoga, and I can't. Or every time I'm trying to get together with friends, I can't count on it and I can't promise anything. I think there are ways to engineer predictability within the context of teams, the same way that I mentioned that, Boston Consulting Group had experimented with, for example. We have a team and you have this night off on Wednesday, and your night off is Thursday, unless there's, the deal is, the next day or something. There are ways for teams to think and talk about that and to say, okay, I've got your back on this particular day. What we know to be true, for example, is when someone has, a health crisis or a family crisis and isn't available, the team covers. We do that all the time in the way law is practiced, because life is life. We just haven't engineered it into the way we work and the expectations of how we work. And because of that, our working model is not sustainable in the talent market that we're seeing.
Yeah. Should we go on to myth number 4?
Myth number 4, go ahead.
Okay. So myth number 4, millennials have a short attention span and are constantly distracted, unlike older generations. So when I say that, Scott, what do you think? Is that true for millennials, or what do you think? Does that hold true across generations nowadays?
There's a lot of research, Avery, showing that, all of our attention spans have been altered by the way we interact with technology. There's even some interesting studies on how we read, for example. Our reading and searching things online now has impacted, for example, what scholars talk about with respect to, very focused attention on complex texts. And our faculty at Harvard Law School actually had an interesting exchange a couple of years ago, trading all of this data and articles back and forth about how reading complex texts online has affected, our ability to retain and understand complex information. So there's a lot out there. When we get to attention span, though, I think that, again, we're not talking about a fundamental character difference. What we're talking about is social context and the fact that people who have grown up only in a digital world are used to, very rapid, change, information flows. There's a lot more information, coming through. And so they've had to develop skills that are about quickly assessing information as relevant or not relevant and moving to the next thing. The rise of the curated network is a really interesting trend, for example. I'm not going to go out and read everything. I'm going to rely on, this particular person who ranks and rates food and this blogger because I trust that person. It's a curated network that starts to develop. And I think it's such a different style of receiving and reacting to information. It's perceived as a short attention span in a way that I don't think is really helpful. I think there's also, increased impatience with inefficiency. And this is one thing I love about working with millennials. And I'll tease sometimes and say, actually, it's a great thing that millennials are lazy. And people look at me funny. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. If a millennial goes onto a website and has to click 4 times to get to what they need, they're not coming back. And driving efficiency, because they will point out, where are the inefficiencies in this process? Why is this taking so long? That short attention span drives a lot of productivity gains. And one of the things when I think about what law firms can do, in a practical way, is to really apply and get focused teams of younger lawyers to look at processes and inefficiencies and technology and figure out, how do we just tighten this up and make it easier and simpler to do? I teach this, seminar at Harvard Law School on innovation and design thinking, and most of what the design thinking movement towards products, away from products and towards services is about figuring out how to deliver services more efficiently so that the customer and the client experiences a lot smoother customer experience. And, getting back to the original myth about, millennials being needy and the generational complaint about that, I flip it on its head when I talk to law firm leaders and said, wait a minute, you have an amazing advantage. You are in a client service business and you are hiring into your law firms the most client-centric, user experience-centered generation of lawyers that's ever existed. So this is awesome. You need to be engaging them to figure out, where are the inefficiencies and how can we do a lot better. One of my, latest recommendations to firms, and we're exploring whether we can develop a program around this at Harvard Law School Executive Education, is the clients are insisting that law firms second associates into them, as a pay-to-play, thing now, a lot more than they ever used to. But most of those secondments are simply, kind of a transfer of free labor, and neither the client nor the law firm learn anything from that experience, and the associate often just kind of stays at the client or moves on after they come back. I think there's a tremendous opportunity to take a group of secondees and train them in design thinking inquiry and how to spot inefficiencies, and come up with, as part of the secondment, a report to the client and to the law firm about, here's the things that we see the client, where we're struggling at the intersection of where the client, is being served by our firm, and here's what we think we can do to fix it.
Yeah. I mean, first impressions count, right? It's not just about, in-person first impressions. It's also online, technology first impressions. So, when I get onto a website that's slow, and as you said, Scott, if I've got to click on it a couple times to refresh and it's just not working, I'm going to X out of it and I probably won't go back into it. And that could mean big money lost, when it comes down to it. And what I've learned is, yes, there is this sense of, we want to understand and to digest information and access information quickly. From my other experience as a contributing writer with Forbes, I've learned what my readers want, and that is they want the bottom line. They want digestible, quick chunks, how to get from, point A to B, in very understandable, concrete, quick terms, so they can then put that into place. And so I've learned as a writer on an online, media platform, the type of attention, like, how much they're willing to read, what it is that they're going to read that's going to capture their attention, which has been fascinating, because, you'll see that many of the online media platforms, they're doing away with long form, format. Those longer articles are less and less. They're going more into media, more into visual aspects, because they know that that's what's going to engage the people who are now the users of the technology. And so it is interesting to actually, be on the front lines and really kind of understanding what the users are looking for. Anything else on the fourth myth? Otherwise, I think we can jump into a recap.
Well, I'll build on that just briefly, which is, working with you, for example, I have enjoyed so much because your shorter attention span means that every conversation we have is very focused. Every communication you send me is bullet points, easy to use. It's so clear to me that, you're driven by a desire in a short period of time to maximize your impact. And that's the great thing and the great news about the next generation of lawyers coming to law firms. You also mentioned, the idea that you're writing in a different way. What we're hearing from clients who, come to us for leadership training in general, counsel and in-house lawyers, they don't want the 40-page, nuanced memo anymore. They want more visual presentation. They want data analytics. They want a different kind of communication style that helps them more quickly and more easily make business judgments under time constraints. I think that if law firms, for example, were able to do that more effectively, it might actually take less pressure off of the 24/7. I think some of the work that's being done in-house counsel tell us is just overproduced, and I think that millennials could very quickly get involved and help spot some of those overproduction issues. Look for collaborative technologies. Look for ways, data visualization and presentation visualization methods of communicating that would be a lot more effective for the businesses that law firms are serving.
Great. So to recap, we talked about these four myths, and we kind of expounded on them and helping to understand, what law firms can do. So Scott, what's one thing that law firms can do?
Yeah, I know we've got several. I think, top of mind right now is around this feedback issue, and really changing the mindset of feedback as being an evaluative system to a developmental system. And that's where the rest of the world has already moved. The firms that are out front now trying to re-engineer the way feedback is just given and received are going to be a lot more effective in the talent market, but also they'll be developing a more effective group of millennials, and they'll be retaining them better as a result of that. As a caveat too, I'd say, a lot of what I'm seeing is that people are focused on the one-on-one feedback conversation between the supervisor and the younger lawyer. There's a whole other layer of feedback in the way teams can work if they would start working more effectively actually as teams.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that law firms can do is to be transparent as much as possible. We talked about this idea that millennials grew up with the internet, so we have information at our fingertips. So if you're not telling us, we're going to at least try and figure out how to get the information that we want. We'd prefer that you tell us, directly. And so with that expectation of knowing, that we can get information, we really value, information. And so whatever information that you can give to allow us to add value to the company, that allows us to advance in our own, careers, ultimately will, bring more value to the organization. So when we talk about being transparent, we're talking about when it comes to salary, we're talking about, work policies. We're talking about, various things, that really helps to know that you're being truthful to us, so that allows us to be more transparent and truthful, back.
I think that's such an important point. As I mentioned before, in all of human history, the labor market globally has never been as transparent, and there's no going back. Law firms are hiring really, really smart people and then are astonished that they want to be involved and understand how the business works. And they want the same data the partners get. I would say that if I'm a leader of a law firm, I need to have an extreme bias towards information sharing and creating room for dialogue, and two-way and 360-degree dialogue. about the future and how we're working together. And the idea that you keep the associates in the dark or you wait for them to, read in a press release about your latest initiative is just so wrong right now. I would start with, engagement surveys just as a simple tool. Every other professional organization I know of uses those, even the military again. And we don't, for the most part. The idea that we've hired really smart people is just something that's, again, one of the top things I would say to keep in mind is millennials have all sorts of expertise that we're just not tapping into, expertise and strengths. The reverse mentoring you mentioned was a great way to start unlocking that potential, helping engaging millennials with respect to technology analysis and pain point analysis of the clients. How do they evaluate the user experience so that client service could be provided more efficiently, effectively? I think that the client world I know is ready for that and want those voices to be heard.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, when you tap into that expertise, the other thing that you're doing is you're giving millennials a voice, and that's what the younger generation wants, but that's what all generations want. We want to be heard so that we can make an impact and really add value, feel like we are part of the team, feel like we can make an impact and real contribution to the organization as a whole.
Yeah, and if an older lawyer is sitting down resenting that, saying, "Well, I didn't have a voice and I didn't complain about it," I'm sorry, but the world has changed, and you actually did want a voice in the same way that they want a voice. They're just more empowered and used to it because the talent market has changed and the world has changed all around. What I really worry about, at the end of the day, is as a profession, will we continue to be able to attract the very best talent? We have taken that for granted, especially in the U.S. for a very long time as a democracy built on the rule of law. The legal profession has been at the center of so much change, and the older generation of lawyers understands that the civil rights movement, the environmental movement, the post-Watergate political reforms, all of those things were driven by lawyers having impact. The younger generation doesn't see that impact and sees that the long apprenticeship period is just too long. And I think that since the legal profession is still a profession and not just an industry and has a broader societal calling, we've got to pay attention to this. And providing psychological safety in teams and making sure voices are heard could not be more important. And I really worry, the way lawyers typically work is very hierarchical, very stilted, and that's just got to change. I think at the essence of it, team processes can be very important to it. There's also, broader issues about the kind of workplaces we're creating, frankly. In the fall, we're going to host a 2-day design workshop to try to think about what could a certification look like to eliminate harassment in the workplace. We are not dealing with, a lot of conditions that create unhealthy environments in which psychological safety is far, far, far from the norm. Avery, I don't know how you react to, as we've talked in the past about, I'm just curious, how much hope do you have that the profession will be able to figure this out? I need to hear a millennial hopeful voice before we.
No, I mean there is hope. I mean, I know individuals, including yourself, who are investing the time and money and energy to really, reevaluate, what can be done, to tap into some of the strengths that law firms currently have, and also to, really look into some of the areas of improvement. And I think that that's what's so helpful about our conversation, is that it really helps to extract and distill, some of the things that can be improved upon, so that ultimately, our entire profession can benefit.
We thank everybody so much for attending and listening, and to those of you who listen to it in the future in recorded format. We want you, to invite you into this conversation that we're having. We need diverse voices to help figure out, how we can help the legal profession move forward. in this rapidly changing world and much more effectively, integrate the incredible talent that this generation of lawyers is going to bring to our profession. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you both so much for an insightful and an important discussion. We just have some end notes to share. So, as a reminder, all attendees will receive a recording of today's webinar and a copy of the PowerPoint in a follow-up email early next week. We have some other upcoming programs we hope you join us for. In August, we have a Career Choice Series program on academia and becoming a dean. Additionally, part 2 of our podcast on character and fitness is up, and all the rest of the Career Insights podcasts are available on ambar.org/career. Lastly, we would appreciate if you take our post-webinar survey to help us with future programming. That all being said, thank you all again for attending and have a great rest of your day.